I'm not sure if it's streaming yet or not. All right, yeah, well, we got it. Let me listen to the volume. Say something. All right, yeah, well, we got it. Let me listen to the volume. Say something. All right, yeah, well, we got it. Let me listen to the volume. Say something. All right, yeah, well, we got it. Let me listen to the volume. Okay, there's something wrong with the audio. It's. All right, yeah, well, we got it.
What's wrong with that?
There's something wrong with the audio. It's. Let me do that.
What's wrong with that?
There's something wrong with the audio. It's. Let's see if that worked. Let me do that.
What's wrong with that?
There's something wrong with the audio. It's. Let's see if that worked. Let me do that.
What's wrong with that? Something wrong with the audio.
It's. Let's see if that worked. Okay, I think I fixed it. Yep, we're good. Hey, Edgy Intellect. Hey, Ashley. We already got some people watching. All right. So, oh my gosh, this is a lot to go through. We were going to start off with Final Fantasies comments. So, how are you doing? Say hello to the two people that are in the chat so far, Cassandra.
Hi.
It's good to have you here. Now, normally I go over like logical, critical thinking aspect, sort of, you know, like debunking skepticism. But you are the queen of Indo-European studies. You know the history behind this stuff, and I have been begging for you to be here.
I know for a while, but I've been busy with shit.
I know. So, here is... Do you want me to do the screen share thing and go over Final Fantasies?
Yeah, we can do that first.
Alright. And I did find this interesting. Boop. Alright, so Final Fantasy was saying Anti-Natalism and Efilism aren't nihilism or nihilistic. You need to know what both philosophies are first before making that claim. Nihilism prescribes apathy towards everything due to meaninglessness and or lack of knowledge on anything. Nihilism is the rejection of all value and the belief that nothing is knowable. And those two qualities are lacking in anti-natalism and Efilism. And he says that I fail to account for that. I said I am not the only one that prescribes nihilism to antinatalism and Efilism. Actually, it would seem only antinatalists and Efilists are the only ones that don't. And so he says, so besides you, who else is calling antinatalism and Efilism nihilistic? And what's your point? Are you saying it's nihilistic because most people think it is? Is that what you're seriously trying to sell here? And the answer to that is obviously no. But, nope, it's the abyss of nihilism, as Friedrich Nietzsche described, where life is meaningless and therefore none of this matters. That's kind of part of your argument. I mean, you might as well say, because of nihilism, we should just not exist, and then go into the pain stuff. And then he responds by saying, no, because nihilism says that pain is equal to non-pain, thus it's fine to experience either or. That's contrary to anti-natalism and Efilism, and the truth of the matter is that the universe is pointless and absurd anyway, according to science. How do existentialists account for things like mass shootings? It's harm caused where, if the criminal offs themselves, they get away with it scot-free. How does your existentialism account for that? I said, humans are, for one, not as evolved as we'd like to think. This is also, in my opinion, why things like anarchism and communism cannot be obtained either, is because humans are fundamentally flawed. We would have to grow up as a species to actually get nice things. But
that one person that I was talking to, she is kind of she's a communist, and she thinks, oh, human nature changes, and we can eventually be in a communist society, and it's like, no.
Well, and we can get
because she thinks that we could achieve this in our lifetimes, and I'm like, no. By the time we achieve what you want, we're all going to be dead. So why the fuck does it even matter?
Oh, why did it do that?
Because you clicked out of it.
Go back to screen sharing. Go back.
Can you scroll in so I can read it?
That's as big as it gets.
Oh.
I think. Wait, I can do this.
You can zoom in, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Is that helpful?
Yeah, a little bit. It's like phone screen too small.
So, Edgy Intellect brought up that it depends on what you mean by nihilism. You can call me kind of nihilistic in terms of belief, but not in terms of ethics and knowledge. That's something that I think I've tried to explain to the Efilists and anti-natalists multiple times, is that nihilism is like, it can apply to multiple things. Like, you can be on the moral or ethics scale, you could be ethically or moralistically nihilistic, which I would say is really bad. That's a really bad position. You don't have to, like, many atheists just call themselves nihilists because they understand that they reject the notion that the universe itself has any kind of intrinsic value or meaning for life itself. So it's just kind of like, well, I mean, that is nihilism. I'm going to go to this because I forgot to... So, where did I leave off? Here we go. Yeah. So humans are not as evolved as they'd like to think. 2, there's mental illnesses or inadequacies that prevent certain people from understanding. I'm not denying the world is a dark place, but you seem to not be able to cope with that reality, and cope is really an important word there. I've sent you links to other philosophers explaining why anti-natalism and Efilism are a product of nihilism, saying, or... Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay, saying or taking the stance of, quote-unquote, the universe is pointless is part of nihilism, so welcome to the family. You're another branch of nihilism, get over it. He goes on to say, how do existentialists account for he reiterates this question because I think I answered it, and he put this in before I answered it, but existentialism gives freedom and liberty to any kind of criminal to harm an adult and children and possibly get away with it scot-free. Existentialism says all types of people can create their own value systems, and all value systems are equal. And that's not necessarily true under nihilist-based philosophy.
Keep going.
So then he finally gets back. He quotes me by saying, "But you seem to not be able to cope with that reality." His response to that is, "What do you mean by cope? You mean be satisfied with being subjected to a corrupt," and this is where I think it gets interesting, "a corrupt government, cruel people, disease." That's something I can't do anything about. Nobody can do anything about that except elaborate further on technological advancements of medical accidents. Again, this is a part, that's inherently a part of reality. Death, again, unavoidable, inherently part of reality. But it's the man-made stuff that really caught my attention. So then I went into this to say, I wouldn't use the word satisfied, as one could be dissatisfied but still cope with a thing. I also wouldn't use human constructs such as a measure of value of life, such as government. These things are man-made and could be undone or readjusted to be less corrupt or have a better ethical standing when it comes to nature and physics. No, they do not care nor possess the negation of care for pain, suffering, joy, or any other thing that is a product of self-awareness. It would seem you cannot deal with the cold reality of that's where I keep saying I needed a comma there. It seems that you cannot deal with the cold reality of that, whereas I'm okay with it. I can cope or deal. Would I say I'm satisfied? No. I am not satisfied at all. No, I would say I am not satisfied. Being that there is no afterlife and we only have so much time for existence, we should dedicate our energy towards building the very human construct of society to exclude as many deficits as possible. We cannot guarantee painlessness, but we can make existence more tolerable by expanding the amount of pleasure and joy life has to offer. We can do this because many of those things are arbitrarily defined as a moral bad, mostly by means of religious ideology, but not limited to. The reason you cannot do drugs and increase the dopamine levels in your brain to feel good isn't because the divine or some divinity of the universe said no to it, or said not to. It's because a human made an arbitrary moral stance against doing it. Same with poverty, war, economics, and many others. You're fighting, and I had to elaborate, maybe Final Fantasy isn't fighting, but I am at least, against many centuries of religious indoctrination that surfaces even within atheists. And I went on to say, for another example, I thought of as being a chronic pain patient, they are more readily accepting the idea of death as opposed to taking opiates to reduce pain and increase quality of life via the opiate epidemic. So why is it, within my own choice, less ethical to choose life and opiates as opposed to outright premature death? What if I'm not done living? Why does society get to make this moral judgment on my behalf? Why are opiates no longer an option on the table? Why are my own decisions as an autonomous human invalidated by another's decision? What if I personally prefer addiction and life as opposed to death now, and the ones denying, or the ones denying the medication are the ones making life harder in this scenario. And as Final Fantasy points out, is that existentialism is fundamentally about choice. And this is what I'm advocating here, is that there is a lack of choice when society says to you, no, you can't have the opiate. You can either choose death, or you can try to live with the pain, which society has pretty much made that impossible.
But what Final Fantasy is talking about, he's saying that we should have the right to die. You know, kind of like the YouTube channel you found, like what was it called? Our Right to Die or something like that.
Yeah, it was. And he was advocating for it. He kept saying, like, we should have the right to die if we don't want to live. We should be able to do this. I don't know that there's really... I mean, technically it's against the law to commit suicide. I can't advocate for suicide because this is YouTube. That violates the terms of agreement. But I don't know that... I mean, if you actually succeeded in it, that they could do anything about it. And, I don't know, there's a lot of these philosophies. Like one of the things that we ran into was the notion of, like, people who advocate for anti-capitalism, somebody that you knew personally. And this does tie into it, is because we were reading about Efilis and Anti-Natalists and bad philosophy, which I do want to go over because some of it was really funny. But like, for instance, the person that you know, I'm not going to name them, but they are very, very anti-capitalist, very pro-communism, not necessarily pro-socialism. They think socialism is a way to get to communism, but when asked if they would like to work, or if they would work, they said, no, we have plenty of resources, there's no need to work. And the unfortunate reality is that the resources get there to you because people work.
Yeah, it's like, I can pull it up. Pull up her statement.
I don't doubt that edgy intellect. Did you know Minham also advocated for suffocating cats, like kittens, that he finds on the street? He talks about morality and ethics, this, that, and the other, and causing pain is bad, but then he turns around and kills kittens.
Because I said, quote, capitalism doesn't encourage exploitation. Is a job really that exploitative? Do you not want to work? And her response is honestly, no, I don't. I wish I didn't have to work as much as I do. And I shouldn't have to. There is more than enough of everything for everybody. We overproduce things just so that capitalists can make a profit. It's awful for the environment.
Well, and that's the other, like, hypocrisy of it, is they do all this stuff on the internet, and unfortunately the internet and anything that's done on a cloud server is incredibly, horrifyingly devastating to the environment.
Yes. Even doing this live stream right now is bad for the environment. We're shitting on the environment right now, as you put it.
And actually, in that show, The Good Place, they brought this up too, is that, like, you know, that they go to heaven. I might be spoiling a little bit, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, I only watched a couple of episodes of The Good Place, but it's which season are you talking about?
Well, I think I'm on the last season.
You're on the last season already?
Okay, I won't spoil too much, but you get the gist of how it works, though, is that you accumulate, like, a point system, right? You know that much, right?
You have a point system based on how your life was, based on how many good things you did, how many bad things you did, and your score would go up and down depending on that.
But one of like the philosophical aspects, or the problem with that, is that when you, let's say that I do a nice thing, but there's so many things attached to it that ripple effect into a negative.
Yeah.
So, like, let's say I buy a tomato for a homeless person. Well, but the tomato was grown in a place or harvested by an industry that contributes all this CO2 to the environment. It destroys the environment. It's harvested by slave labor.
It's pretty much the butterfly effect.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. So then oh yeah, I forgot to do the screen share so people can see what I'm looking at, and you can too. This was Cassandra and I, we read through this already. This is about Efilisms and Anti-Natalists. Some of this is really funny. Like I have to read. An anti-natalist is a hypocrite if he does not lead by example and kill himself. I like this person. This person's really edgy and funny. But they said, well, let's begin with the fact that one of the following two statements must be true. 1. An anti-natalist is a hypocrite if he does not lead by example and kill himself. 2. An anti-natalist thinks himself more important / special than other people as an excuse for not killing himself. In other words, the only ethical anti-natalist is a dead anti-natalist. And this is where I learned about in Minham drowning cats. Was from here, and they or either that it was Reddit, but they posted the video link where you could see him talking about it and hear it with your own ears. It was crazy. This one, I think it was a really good one, but we're gonna get to the environmentalist aspect of anti-natalism. So like They're suggesting a similarity between like environmentalists or people that are anti-capitalist, or even the case of Efilism and anti-natalism, is that quite often we keep seeing them enjoying the fruits of it, or the forbidden fruit. And here's a picture of Greta Thunberg, and like she's got plastic containers here with a plastic fork, and she's on a train. And Cassandra and I talked about this in depth, is that if you were to reduce your carbon footprint all the way down to zero, and even if you did all the way down to zero, it wouldn't undo what has already been done. And so even if you reduced it down to zero, still, like, the climate change would still have an effect before it finally...
And we would still have all the plastic to deal with that's in the ocean and on beaches in foreign countries.
So eventually it would plateau. But the question is even amongst the people who advocate for this, how much of our way of life would you be willing to sacrifice to get down to a carbon footprint of zero? I'm not trying to hate on environmentalism. Like, I think, it is important, and I don't deny climate change is real. It's very real. The problem is that I don't think anyone's willing to sacrifice the amount of stuff we would have to sacrifice to actually do anything about it. I mean, you're talking about going back to living in houses made out of mud and poop.
Yeah, we were talking about it. This is the position, people actually advocate for that. It's called Anarcho-Primitivism.
Yeah, that's something I haven't really heard about. You explained it to me, so go ahead and explain it.
I'm looking it up right now.
Oh.
Anarcho-Primitivism is an anarchist critique of civilization that advocates a return to non-civilized ways of life through deindustrialization, abolition of the division of labor or specialization, and the abandonment of large-scale organization and high technology. Anarcho-primitivists critique the origins and progress of the Industrial Revolution and industrial society. According to anarcho-primitivism, the shift from hunter-gatherer to agricultural subsistence during the Neolithic Revolution gave rise to coercion, alienation, and social stratification.
Well, from my eye view, the way that I because I was looking at very, very primitive human beings, how we lived. I mean, literally, we would take sticks and weave them around other sticks, and then we would take horse poop and mud, mix it up together, and slap it on these woven sticks to create walls, and then the roof would literally just be grass. And that's not even going to reduce our carbon level to zero.
Because in those times, houses weren't really permanent. They were more you can take it down for the winter, and then in the spring you build your house again, But, I was going to share my screen.
Okay, I can do that. I can pop this up. Stop. There you go.
All right. And so many classical anarchists reject the critique of civilization, while some, such as Wolfie Landstreicher, endorse the critique without considering themselves anarcho-primitivists. Anarcho-primitivists are distinguished by the focus on the practice of achieving a feral state of being through quote-unquote rewilding, whatever that means. And basically the hypocrisy of that is basically using modern technology to spread that message.
I think this is a common problem today, is that people they don't, if you mention a modicum of actual truth, there's groups of people out there that just cannot handle it. It's look, I understand climate change, global warming, it's real. I understand that, and I want to do something about it, but I mean, in the society that we would have to return to, we wouldn't be able to do things like open heart surgery. There wouldn't be any kind of industrialization to mass produce things like antibiotics and many other medications that we use.
Yeah. If we try to go the way of the anarcho-primitivists, our life expectancy would drop back to 40 max. You're pretty much at the end of your lifespan at that point.
Yeah, and a lot of people, if by me saying this bit of truth, that I'd say 99% of society, even the people who advocate for environmental change. If they were to have to sacrifice, I mean, that everyone's going to have their limit on this. Like, some people might be willing to go back to the 1800s, but I mean, I would be willing to bet 99% of the population, even the people who advocate for it, would not be willing to make the sacrifices to go all the way back to a society where we use horse poop and mud to create walls for houses. Okay.
I mean, we could make our houses still out of the materials we do now, but it would take longer because we wouldn't be using, machinery to do it. We would have to do it through rope, manpower, and it would take longer periods of time to build houses out of the same material if we have machinery to do it.
So I think what human beings are doing is what they've always done, which is we try to have our cake. We want to have our cake and we want to eat it too. And what we've always done in the past is we try to adapt. And so what I think, like, green energy and stuff like that is our way of trying to have, like, our cake and eat it too, because we don't want to get rid of the infrastructure that we have. We want to keep the way of life that we have. But we don't want to do this. We don't want to contribute to greenhouse gases anymore, or things that affect the climate. So I think that's what we've always done. Is we've always tried to make our environment adapt to us. That is actually something that is intrinsic to human beings themselves. Beavers do it a little bit. There's some species here and there that do it, but for the most part, I don't think people would be willing to do this. So, do we want to read some of these bad philosophy? Because some of them really, I think, are kind of funny.
Which one do you want to read first?
I don't know. I mean, I guess we can go over the first one. I think the first one it only has 28. This one has 56 upvotes. I don't think I upvoted this one. I do like this one. I'll read this one. So this is the one where either one of the two is correct. Either an antinatalist is a hypocrite if he does not lead by example and kill himself, or two, an antinatalist thinks himself more important / special than other people as an excuse for not killing himself. Or in other words, the only ethical antinatalist is a dead antinatalist. Having conclusively annihilated whatever semblance of substance the antinatalist position might have hoped to have, we can now move on to dealing with other equally egregious failures of logic. Some of the hopeless adherents of this epic fail tend to spout to whoever doesn't actually want to hear it and just wish they'd shut up. For example, their contention that Earth would be better off with all humans dead or removed from it, supposedly restored to some idyllic, happy, and serene natural state, even if we are graceful enough to allow putting aside the fact that humans are themselves the product of natural evolution, and so have a fundamental reason and right to reside on this planet. It would appear that the bitter, misandrist, and pessimistic minds that concoct such nonsense seem to be unaware of the fact that with no humans left on this planet, there wouldn't actually be anyone around to notice, record, enjoy, or in any way make exist this alleged human-free paradise thus created.
Does that person mean by misandrous, do they mean misanthropic? Because
yes.
misandrous means you hate men.
Well, yeah, I think they mean it like that, like hate mankind.
Yes.
Like humankind.
Yeah, well, that would be misanthropy. That would be misandry is just the hatred of men.
Yeah.
You know, the gender, men.
I was just reading it out loud, but yes, that is correct. Misandry is just, is misogyny, and but for men. I know. But yeah, technically they mean, a misanthrope. The attentive reader, or anyone with a semblance of a mind with even the most rudimentary capacity for logic and reason, will have realized that such a world, then, basically does not exist in any meaningful sense. So there is a lush and fantastically beautiful planet in orbit around the star Sirius. Did you know? Well, no, you don't. And if I were to magically remove it with my imaginary Death Star, nothing would have changed, because as far as you are concerned, this planet isn't there. It does not exist, in much the same way a human free world would also basically not exist. Even if some physical quantity of planetary material in the universe could be said to constitute it, if no sentient being can appreciate its existence, it might as well not exist at all. That's kind of like the whole, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound, I suppose.
So, therefore, that tree should not exist.
Well, it wouldn't exist because there'd be no observer to proclaim its existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that to be an antinatalist is to be a total idiot, a fundamentally misguided, foolish, bitter, and dare I say, evil and hate-filled mind with nothing to contribute except misery, negativity, and an assortment of other unpleasantries nobody wants or asked for. No ifs, no buts, no nothing. If you are an antinatalist, kindly be consistent with your bullshit theories and cause your own death, or shut up. Be the change you want to see. And I think that I think that goes back to what this Philip Husband guy was basically saying. There are we do have these, like these. I love these. Okay, so antinatalism is commonly justified by Benatar's asymmetry, which can be summed up as pain is bad, pleasure is good, not pain, good, not pleasure, neutral. But the asymmetry makes no logical sense. If pain is bad, then not pain, not bad. If pleasure is good, then not pleasure, not good. Not bad is good or neutral. Not good is bad or neutral. That's kind of funny. So how it would actually work is pain is bad, pleasure is good, not pain is good or neutral, and not pleasure is bad or neutral. I actually like this because he's not necessarily harping on antinatalism or Efilism. He's just correcting it. He's just like, let me help you guys. So this one, I don't know that I entirely agree with this one, but I do think that this is a problem that we deal with quite a lot, that he illustrates in it. Like I said, I mean, if it's just like when I keep talking to Chick Micken, and he says that I speak a different language. He's like, you speak in the language of a Marxist, or you speak in the language of that from the Frankfurt School. When in actuality, I arrive at my far left ideology because of Enlightenment thinkers. And the Enlightenment thinkers actually are the ones that they inspired the Frankfurt School, if I'm correct. But there's just a lot of this detachment from actual truth. It's like, so even as a leftist myself, even talking, like, even though I'm not satisfied with capitalism, recognizing that we're not going to wake up in a non-capitalist society anytime, not in our lifetime, but like you point out to a right-winger that things are becoming more, the automation is becoming more common than actual people, like human labor, and that capitalism itself is not really very well equipped to deal with that as far as obtaining and getting and offering of like the goods and services and resources if 90% of the job market is saturated by automation. They don't want to talk about that. It's like, no, capitalism is it. But on the other flip side of that, if you talk to someone who is on Marxist theory, and it's like, look, I understand capitalism, when it turns to cronyism, is bullshit, and I think realistically, the best and most logical argument you can do is to put regulation on capitalism to keep it from going to the crony capitalist place. Is that you need a higher authoritarian figure, authority figure, such as local government or the federal government. We could dispute that with the libertarians. I don't know. But it's going to come down to some system stepping in and saying to companies, hey, you can't treat people like total dog shit, and your ability to have 70% higher profit in an economic recession, basically the free market model in the sense that we see today, with all the inflation that we see, with companies making a 70% plus in profit margin, is unacceptable. It's like if it was 20% profit margin because of lack of resources, that would make sense. But it's not. It's 70%. It's up 70%. It's like you do not have permission, or you should not have permission, to break the economy, send everyone spiraling into poverty just so you can make a profit.
Mm-hmm.
But,
and also on automation, like I was talking to that one person that I mentioned earlier about that, and I was like, with automation, what are we going to do about capitalism exactly? With machines, they don't have to sleep or take vacations. And then she was right. And then she was like, right, so how will regular people eat if survival is tied to wage labor? And it's like, what?
So that's the flip side, is that even if you relate and identify greatly with Marxist or anti-capitalist notions, when you talk to somebody who is like on the communist sort of spectrum or anti-capitalist sort of spectrum, and you tell them, like, well, look, capitalism derives from... This is where you're really going to come in place. Okay, so my understanding is capitalism comes from cow heads. Capitalism is just like an evolved state from that we got from barter and trade, and what we found is that if you look up like the etymology of the word capitalism, it actually comes from the barter and trade days of where we were trading like cattle.
Well, using cattle as livestock, as a measurement of livestock.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was going to say about like the automation thing, like that person that I mentioned earlier, she eventually said, well, everyone should have access to these robots. And it's like, why would everyone want to work on them? Because not everyone would want to work on those robots who are going to be doing the automation thing for in the future, you know, for jobs and whatever. You know, not everyone will want to do that. So it's like, why would everyone want to use that?
Not everyone can be a robotics technician or engineer, right?
Exactly. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the whole thing, well, I don't think we should have to work. We have an abundance of resources. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. The way that we get resources in today's world is extremely effective, even though it still incorporates slave labor, which I think is something we should get rid of, and we should pay them actual money.
And a lot of the shit that we get comes from shipping via semis. Because if we didn't have them, then all of the production would just basically stop.
Well, and that's the problem. When you ask them, would you work? And they say, no, I wouldn't work. And it's like, you can't do that. I mean, like, my ideal, when I picture in my head my anarchist utopia, I picture myself with like a little farm of tobacco and marijuana and opium poppies and psilocybin mushrooms. But you know what? I'm also going to have another garden, another place where I'm growing food, because I got to eat. You know?
Yeah.
Like, you can't not work. I mean, you're going to have to do something to survive.
Yeah. You're going to have to grow, like, tomatoes or potatoes and a lot of other plants to eat.
Chick Micken says there should be a cap on income and the amount of land you can own. Megacorporations shouldn't be allowed to take
That sounds like communism.
This, like I said, this is where I think leftists, far leftists, and people like Chick Micken do actually agree. We both kind of hate the multi-conglomerate corporations. I don't think that's a secret by any means. But I'm just saying, the reason we have an abundant access to resources, see, Chick Micken says sounds more like fascism to me. This goes back to when we were comparing communism and fascism, and they had a lot in common. It's like they both...
because they're not that different. This goes back to the horseshoe theory. Which that person I was talking about earlier, she says horseshoe theory is bullshit. When how can you debunk it when there's so much evidence backing it up?
Well, I looked at a comparison, and it's like, well, both use socialism, but they use it in different ways.
Both use some tactics to silence others and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to go towards a humanitarian, egalitarian system, and fascism, it just isn't very well known for that. But on the flip side, communism says they are, but they're not. They haven't been thus far. So both sides, I think...
And the thing about like Julius Evola and that person I was talking about, they both say that, like, one of them, like, Evola says, oh, they weren't real fascist countries, and then that one person I was mentioning says, well, those countries weren't real communists. It's the same argument, but different ideologies. It's moving the goalpost.
Well, we'll get into Julius Evola eventually, but we're still working on Efilism and Anti-Natalism. I'm just pointing out that a lot of people participate in this these days, is that It's like just the assertion of actual truth, like undeniable reality, makes them want to do a backflip, and they can't handle it. And it's like everybody's head filled up with helium and floated up into the clouds, and it's so hard as a philosopher to try and bring everyone back down to earth. It's very difficult. It's like, no, you can't. It's like you can't not work. I mean, then that disrupts the where you get the resources. That's bad. That doesn't work in application.
Yeah, when you don't work, you're gonna have shortages.
Yeah, and then what anarchists do is they come out with the whole the cooperative survival, which is like, I have my farm. Well, I could have friends and people around me come and help me with this farm, and in return I can give them some of the things that I grow. And but I don't want to go too further much because we're supposed to be doing anti-natalism and Efilism. So there's this Philip Husband. He says, pro-natalist position, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Anti-natalist position, do throw the baby out with the bathwater. When I read some of this stuff, I can almost feel or hear like Bobby B sitting over my head, or behind my shoulder, making anti-abortion claims. And it still goes back to, I want to reiterate that, I still stand behind what I said, but I want to go back to the difference is when a person is outside of the womb, they are consciously aware of their own existence. I saw some person say that if it's about quality of life and whatnot, and not signing things for affordable housing and taking care of the people that are here, etc., that we should allow abortions to commence all the way up until age 18, when we decide that, you're just not going to have a good life, so we're going to, they're 18. At that point, it's like, that's not an abortion, that's euthanasia. But I thought that was a crap argument, because there's a big difference between, even a newborn that is perceiving the world around it, and then a fetus that has no idea that it exists. I honestly think it would be better to stop a person from becoming self-aware than waiting until they're self-aware, going, oh my God, I'm alive, I don't want to die, and then killing them. You make the decision, which is more ethical. So to go on with this, I didn't have to think very hard to discover which position I agree with. Neither would I. I would not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The anti-natalist position presupposes that human life is more bad than good, as Nietzsche pointed out. The value judgments of philosophers regarding existence are solipsistic. That is a tongue twister. Solipsistic. That's solipsism, right?
Solipsism, yeah.
Yeah. And
the philosophical position that you believe that that everything outside of your mind is not real, and only your perception of the world exists, or your own mind exists, or your own ego or whatever exists.
And either under solipsism, deciphering whether things are real or not is an assumption either way, which I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they derive almost entirely from the philosopher's own experience of life, and perhaps also from that of others they have encountered. In either case, it is the philosopher's personal interpretation of their own and others' experience that leads them to their personal conclusion regarding whether life is sufficiently worthwhile or to justify the act of procreation in the face of inevitable suffering and limitations of human existence. that some philosophers, such as David Benatar, should adopt an anti-natalist position, should not surprise us. Philosophers tend to regard the material world with a degree of disdain, preferring instead to deal with metaphysical matters. I find it rather amusing that such philosophers never seem to concede that the leisure they have for their I think that's supposed to be cognitions, is entirely contingent upon the merely spawning mass of humanity, who absolve them from the need to grow their own food, build their own shelters, make their own clothing, and so on, while they project their own solipsistic loathing of existence into humanity as a whole. One suspects that they would loathe life even more if people actually took their prescriptions seriously and ceased to reproduce. I shouldn't imagine that their philosophical detachment would last very long. They would have to wait a decade to see a dentist, and had to catch and eat rats to make up for the absence of food and empty supermarkets. Anti-natalism is not only solipsistic, it is decadent, at least according to Nietzsche's definition, a product of a flabby and satiated culture in which an intellectual masturbation is valued over the instinct to live and flourish. How easy it is to find reasons to despise being when one's continued existence requires minimal time and effort. The less something costs us, the less we value it. The sheer arrogance of antinatalism is a product of its inherent solipsism. For antinatalists, the argument is over. They have determined that life is not worth living, and therefore it is not. It seems not to have occurred to them that any potential offspring they may have generate might come to a different conclusion, and that they might even be persuaded of their error by their own children. I had this very argument with a friend of mine who actually is a trained philosopher. It took me 2 days, but I finally convinced him that his own children might end up being wiser than him, and that his suicide might be premature in the light of this possibility. Antinatalism is fashionable amongst some extreme environmentalists. As far as they are concerned, there are just enough of them. But
probably the eco-fascists probably talking about.
I know that I see that with Efilism, is that they say that life existing is actually one of the contributing factors to the harm of the environment. They're like, especially people, with all the waste that we produce. So I think that's what they're talking about. Where was I? Fuck. But it is the as yet unborn who constitute the threat to the planet. It is fine for them to ride on trains made from steel that is mined from Mother Earth and smelted in energy-hungry furnaces as they eat tropical fruit in Northern Europe, but God forbid that they should create future generations who might want to enjoy similar conveniences and pleasures. And then you see the picture of Greta Thunberg. Behold St. Greta, tempted by the forbidden fruit in her air-conditioned carriage. Environmentalist antinatalists are just as arrogant and narrow-minded as the philosophical variety. They assume that the human population will continue to grow. It won't. It's already declining in educated and urbanized areas, which are increasingly large proportions of the world, and that the demand for energy will continue to pollute the atmosphere. Sustainable energy sources are already outcompeting fossil fuels in terms of price. The human urge to reproduce is just as valid as that of any other species, and unlike any other creature, we have attempted to prevent other species from becoming extinct. The European bison, well, I would say that the American bison is another one, and the Arabian aurochs are successes in this regard. The choice to have children or not should be entirely personal, and I couldn't agree more with that. It is subjective. I will admit that I hesitated myself, since I was worried that I might pass on my rather depressive temperament to any children I might have, but fortunately my son is quite different from me in this respect, and we're both glad that he exists. An antinatalist attitude may be justifiable during extended wars and famines that have no end in sight, but otherwise it is merely negativity and misanthropy in the guise of philosophy. The naive hue of resolution, sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And I really like that guy's take on it, because it's not a problem just in anti-natalism or Efilis. It's a problem in many little like subcategories, as we've pointed out. I mean, even within the trans community, like for you've encountered this with, just simply stating that trans women biologically are born males. You've had problems with that.
Yeah, because there's trans people on Twitter saying that calling trans women biologically male is missexing them, and trans misogyny, and it's like, what? And it's like, missexing is not even a word, so it's like, the fuck you talking about?
But I mean, it comes down to something that,
because denying you're biologically male negates you being trans anyway, because being biologically male is pretty much like being a trans person is the whole point of transitioning. You transition from your biological sex. This is why gender and sex are two different things, and not the same.
But I mean, they tried, like, they can't accept the uncomfortable truth, as Nietzsche would say, and it's really hard to tell this to people. It's like, I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I'm just trying to obtain the most valid form of truth that there is.
Yeah, it's like give a trans woman birth control pills and see what happens.
Oh, that wouldn't be a good idea. But I mean, there is a point in that. I mean, if transitioning, if being a trans woman means that you were not born biologically male, then it's not transitioning.
You weren't born biologically female.
Yeah. Then you wouldn't be a trans woman, would you? You would just be a woman. We would.
You would be a cis woman.
Yes. So the other this one I really liked, because this is what I've been trying to argue to anti-natalism and Efilism for a while, is exactly what this person says. I believe it is a very valid philosophical stand, but it will never be the norm. And I have been trying to say that over and 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 over again, and they just don't get it. So what is it? Do you want to what is solipsism? You want to explain solipsism again?
Like that solipsism is
Solipsism, philosophical idea that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Solipsism, from Latin solus, alone, and ipse, self, is the philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist.
as an epistemological position. Solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world, and the mind cannot be known and might not exist outside the mind.
And like I said, that to me is because if you say that the external world is real under solipsism, that's an assumption. If you say that the external world, whether you say it's real or not real, is an assumption either way. That type of thing is really, like, I think, mind-bending to me. And I think
whether the world has verisimilitude or not. It's an assumption either way.
All right, now we've gone over the Efilism, and I'm trying to get to Chigmikin's comment so we can get on to Julius Evola. I'm glad I fixed, because I have to go hunting for, I think, the first one. So I'm glad I fixed OBS Studio. So I don't have to do that anymore. So,
and when we talk about Julius Evola, I want to get on with the. I want to talk about that one guy, and that one guy survived the drive.
yes. I don't know much about him, but you apparently you know more. I think that hits closer to home because he covers like Indo-European studies, but he's doing this with like a slant.
A crypto-fascist way of doing things, where he emphasizes genetics, emphasizes skin color, the whole blue-eyed, blonde hair stuff. And he's friends with the golden one, he's like best friends with the Golden One, who you do know.
Yes, I do know who the Golden One is. But I've only looked at like maybe like a handful of videos, and I was like, bleh. ContraPoints, I think, did a pretty good job covering him. I guess she kind of trolled him, showing like almost naked. I don't know how she got a hold of those, but whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Rational Wiki has a article about the Golden One, and the Golden One made a video saying it's a quote hit piece.
I don't understand why these people just can't like admit it.
Yeah, it's like why can't these people be intellectually honest with themselves and the people they're explaining their beliefs to? Like, why is it always, well, I'm not a bigot, but you believe that, you know, homosexuals can't exist. That's not bigotry, huh?
Chick Micken says it's weird that the left only likes anti-white pagans. We're
anti-white pagans, huh?
I
think most. What?
I was going to say, hold on. I know you want to get into that because that's your thing. You actually know the historical remarks on the Aryan race. And they get this wrong, don't they?
Well, and I was going to say that most people in the polytheist communities are European descent, but there are non-white people in these European communities.
Most of the pagans I know are anti-racist, but they're not anti-white. Like, most of them are pretty liberal, but they're not anti-white. I don't know where this anti-white narrative comes from. I'm not against white people. Are you against white people?
No, I'm not.
I'm not against any ethnicity. I don't generally care.
That's just stupid.
But I will say, Chick Megan, there's one thing that I appreciate about you is that you're honest with me. You know, you don't tiptoe around it. You're like, I like fascism. Fuck yeah. I mean, thank you for being honest. So,
yeah. Chick Micken's like, fuck yeah, fascism. I love it. You should too.
Well, I'm not going to, because fascism has led to some pretty big atrocities in this world, and
the worst atrocities in the world.
I'm too pro-egalitarian and too pro-humanitarian, and I follow too much of, liberal Enlightenment philosophy to sort of go down that bank. No. And I want to talk about that because a lot of the philosophies of like liberal philosophy, Enlightenment thinking, and
the classical liberal philosophies of the founding fathers,
they would disagree with fascism also.
Well, yeah, they would also agree with they would disagree with communism. They would disagree with anything that would, because this is what I wish the Republican Party would go back to, is decentralizing and what is it? Yeah, decentralizing and deconsolidating power. Because that's really where the philosophy of the Republican Party, what it was, predating people like Reagan and Nixon.
But now they're doing the exact opposite. Reaganomics.
Yeah. So that's where the Republican Party stood before all this this weird, we're gonna chisel away at freedom things. Like, I think the Republican philosophy predating Reagan and Nixon would probably, like, on let's say, like, detaching Roe v. Wade, it wouldn't necessarily be like a push towards chiseling away on freedoms and liberty. It would be from the stance that the federal government has too much power over the states. And I think old school Republicans would also support the idea of getting rid of prohibitions, because again, prohibitions is an oversight of the federal government, and that's.
I was reading on like when I was reading about like Roe v. Wade, like the no bail return, it would be up to the states whether or not it would be legal in those states. And I read on that one list of worst presidents to best presidents, and one of them was right before the time of the Civil War. The president at the time made the decision that it would be up to the states whether or not slavery would be illegal or not. But I think that it should have been up to the federal government to make slavery illegal. And the president should never have made that decision, because then the Civil War would never have happened had the president just said, well, federal government is going to say slavery is illegal, you know? They could have made that decision, but they didn't. They made it up to the states instead, and that's how we got the Union state versus the slave states in the Civil War.
Well, that's where the left comes in play. Is the left says, well, certain things do need to have federal oversight. Us dirty little leftists, us commies, us Frankfurt School ideologues.
Us Marxists.
Yes. So, okay, on to Chickmicken, not Chickmicken. all these clever little profiles you make, Chickmicken, sometimes they make me laugh. I remember the one that you made with, like, a ridiculously, it was a ridiculous, just absolute, like overgeneralized, like stereotype Jewish person with this ridiculously overly stereotypical Jewish name. I don't think it matters if you do that. I don't think that'll hide you from the algorithm if you go around saying negative things to people. Now, obviously, I grew up in the 90s. I don't give a shit. Like, I just let it roll off my back. But I can tell you, though, I do not, like, Google is not owned by the Jews, and I don't think, yeah, that was it, Rabbi Hamber something. That was hilarious. When you came up with that, I was like, that is ridiculous. But that's one thing I think the left and the right do not agree on. But from my perspective, lived experience, all that good stuff, media is not predominantly owned by Jews or the left. And honestly, I think these corporations like Google, they don't give a shit if it's left or right. All they give a shit about is their ad revenue and what's going to get them ad revenue. They don't care.
They care about their profits. They don't care about ethnicity or which ethnic group rules what. They don't give a shit.
No, they'll pander all day. All day, but when they interact with politics, they don't give a shit.
It's like when in June, when these corporations pander to LGBT people, we all know that these corporations don't give a shit about LGBT people.
No, they're interested in LGBT people staying tuned on their favorite YouTube channels so that they can get ad revenue.
Yes.
That's all they care about. I mean, you have to keep in mind, they used to block gay people because it was controversial.
Exactly. And it's like, YouTube, I thought you were pro-LGBT. You know, this is hypocritical.
Well, they're pro whatever makes them money.
Yep. Oh, I was on the extension of what I was making on the analogy of states legalizing or making slavery legal and illegal. I was making the comparison that the federal government should say, yes, abortion is legal, It shouldn't be up to the states.
It should be federally
realistically-
protected.
What?
It
Yeah,
should be
so
federally protected, and I
Yes,
don't think it should fall on the 14th
because
Amendment.
realistically, abortion will not be illegal in all 50 states. That's not going to happen.
Well, if they use the federal government to do that, that is tyranny.
Yes. But if they put it up to the states, it's not going to be, abortion's not going to be banned nationwide. That's just not going to happen.
Well, maybe Susan, Chick Mickens saying this, Susan Wojcicki, she, I don't know if she's a leftist or not. She knows how to smile in front of a camera. She's really good at PR stunts.
I think she's a leftist because YouTube is kind of accused of pandering to the woke scolds.
Well, and I'm glad that differential is being made, that many leftists are making a differentiation between the woke scolds and other leftists. Just like, no, stop flagging people down, stop harassing people like that. That is ridiculous. That's got to stop.
Mhm.
Like, the censorship has got to stop. There's nothing.
Same with modern games. Like, the gaming community is sick of all the pandering to these fucking woke scolds that don't even play the games anyway, but they complain. It's like that one video by Metatron that I sent you, where it's like body type A, body type B, and he was critiquing that, saying like, oh, we can't, saying that apparently to these people, we can't have male and female in video game selection anymore. Like, these people, they just can't do it because it just blows their mind.
Well, yeah,
because these gaming communities want to pander to the small minority of non-binary people who find it offensive that you have male and female in gaming selections. It's like that's fucking ridiculous.
I don't think that they should do that to artists. I don't think they should go up to artists and tell them what should be in their stuff. That's crazy.
Right, the artists should just tell them to fuck off.
Well, they should do what comes naturally to them, you know? I mean, like, if there's a non-binary person out there that wants to make a game, they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
Nobody's stopping them. That's the thing. But,
right.
So Chick Nicken says that Susan Wojcicki is an ethno-nationalist, like himself, except in white countries. And Edgy Intellect says commies and woke scolds are not the whole left. Not even the majority, and I would agree with that. You looked at that.
Like woke scolds and tankies, they're pretty much like 1% of the left.
I was just gonna say you looked at that one at one point that the Communist Party in the United States was like only like 200 people or something like that.
No, it was a little bit more than that. It was like 5,000 members. In the American Communist Party, or the Communist Party of the USA, there's only 5,000 members. Yeah, Marxism is taking over the left, huh? Yeah, 5,000 members have that much power, don't they?
And 5,000 members isn't shit.
Right.
Well,
whereas other parties like the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, they have 94,000 members. And those people, most of them, do not agree with communism. They just agree with social democracy or democratic socialism. And that is where you have the mixed economy. Well, in social democracy, you have the mixed economy of capitalism and socialism. With democratic socialism, you don't have the mixed economy. You have that. There's a difference. With democratic socialism, you have the socialists that want to replace capitalism with socialist economics.
I think that's what edgy intellect just...
Whereas in social democracy, you have the mixed economy with socialism and capitalism.
That's what edgy intellect said in much fewer words. He said most lefties are social democrats and or liberals. And I think that's true.
Yeah. The minorities in the left are pretty much the woke scolds, the communists, the tankies, the neoliberals, probably the
anarchism isn't very popular, but most anarchists, I think, realize that anarchism is not going to happen, at least in our lifetime.
Nope.
Yeah. So, anyway, Chick Mickett is saying, why is it that because it came from the Frankfurt School, it is automatically wrong? Neither the Frankfurt School or their critics were ever concerned with whether their philosophies were right or wrong. Not everything works that way. Not everyone who promotes an idea actually believes it. Sometimes people push self-destructive philosophies on their...
Nobody is saying that what came from the Frankfurt School is right or wrong. What we were saying that is wrong is what if Althist was saying that it came from the Frankfurt School. By asserting that it came from there, that is a fallacy.
Well, it's the implied. I'll get into the critical, like the logic and critical thinking on that in just a second, but the self-destructive philosophies on their enemies, I don't know that that's true. Like, I think Marx, when he came up with that philosophy, cultural Marxism, like you actually look at Antonio Gramsci, his motive was very clear, was to infiltrate other countries and establish Marxism or communism there. Unfortunately, one of the things that Antonio Gramsci really hated, especially in Western civilizations, was the fact that we did have mixed economies of socialism, which Antonio Gramsci referred to socialism as quid pro quo communism, so like fake communism. But he said the real problem in countries that had mixed economies of socialism and capitalism is that they had a social safety net to fall back on, making it really, really hard to create like a collapse and then a revolution. So he goes on to say, critical theory, aka cultural Marxism, is the perfect example of that. It was intentionally designed to destroy the American founding stock. If you look at what Antonio Gramsci wrote, his goal was not to overthrow America. His goal was to overthrow any kind of society that was not communistic. And I would say
that includes all democracies, all monarchies, and pretty much every other form of government that's not communist.
Yes. He wasn't just, America bad. He was anything that isn't communism bad. And he was very idealistic in his thinking. Again, it goes back to that solipsism type thing.
I wouldn't necessarily call that solipsism. I would call that blatant narcissism.
Let's just go to blatant narcissism. But, I mean, Antonio Gramsci and cultural Marxism or cultural Bolshevism has not been successful at all. And I think it's...
Cultural bullshitism.
Yeah. I don't think it's as successful at all. And I think a lot of the movements towards civil rights and egalitarian movements are really based more off of a liberal philosophy and an Enlightenment thinking philosophy than it was actually based off of Marx. Because, to my knowledge, Marx and even Antonio Gramsci, when I was reading his stuff, they didn't say anything about LGBT rights. They didn't say anything about women equality. They didn't say anything about this stuff. They were more interested in creating cultural hegemony. Not
because everything else was irrelevant to them.
And
That's why they didn't write about it.
And that's what I'm getting at is a lot of these philosophies are very, very old. And that's what I wanted to ask you about is like where do we get, the concept of egalitarianism, humanitarianism, and I've went over liberal philosophy. I've even went over how old communism actually is. That Marx, he made it popular, but concepts of communism date all the way back to 230 years BCE in the Shu dynasty.
The concepts of that originate further back. They go back to Confucius, who was pretty much contemporary with Socrates, because they lived around the same time. Meaning that concepts like humanitarianism in China go back to the 400s BCE.
Well, what about in like European or like Indo-European cultures? Did any of them talk about like humanitarianism or egalitarianism? I think if you go back far enough, like I'm looking at some of like from what I've read, which I've read little compared to you, is that the Indo-European people were actually very egalitarian when it came to like men and male and female empowerment. Is that they really didn't take an issue with female control, and you have stories like Boudica.
Yeah, Boudica. She was a Celtic queen who rebelled against Rome.
Right.
Because Rome was in the process of taking over Britain, and Britain at the time was Celtic.
So now, and also my understanding, like when it comes to like LGBT, now our understanding of like transgender back in those days would have been mind-blowingly different than today. They probably would have had to do very, very interesting stuff to try and deal with like any kind of gender dysphoria. But like homosexuality, to my understanding, they didn't even have a word for it because it was just treated like it was, well, it's just a part of life.
Like right here, I'm on my Facebook, and I'll share my screen. The Scythians, a group of ancient tribes of nomadic warriors who originally lived in what is now southern Siberia, Siberia from 900 BCE to 200 BCE, and trans women diviners called the NRA, who used an early form of hormone replacement therapy to divine. The NRE took part of the lime tree, dividing into 3 parts. Then they twined it around their fingers, unbound it, and repeated. The Scythian shamanism also involved religious ecstasy through the use of cannabis. And the NRE were considered a sacred class in Scythian society and were consulted when the king was ill. Philosophers who discussed them include Herodotus, Hippocrates, and Aristotle. So you look at these and you realize that trans people are older than than say, the past 40 years.
Okay. I'm going to go back to my screen sharing. So, yeah, that's why I say to imply that just because it came from a source, and this, source X, it came from source X, okay, it's like, well, there are things in the Bible that I like. I mean, most things in the Bible I would say are incorrect, but just because it came from the Bible doesn't automatically make it incorrect. Another thing that I made mention of was just because it comes from a fascist doesn't mean that it's automatically incorrect or correct. But one of the things that a fascist discovered, a fascist scientist, was epigenetics, and we accept that in the scientific world as truth today. And epigenetics, we theorize, is actually one of the predominant causes of homosexuality.
It could also be like one of the causes for transgenderism in people.
So, I mean, that's accepted by right wing and left wing alike, and that was so just an example. So I don't like this whole this implied, well, it came from Marx or it came from the Frankfurt School, therefore it's automatically bad or wrong. You would have to look at each individual philosopher, what it is they said that you take ilk with or what you take ill with, and why. There's a why or a because that is missing, and when you don't have that, then yeah, that is a fallacy. You don't have that. You just like, oh, well, it came from the Bible, it's it's just wrong, or oh, that came from a fascist, it's just automatically wrong. You could dismiss it even though it could be an inherent truth. That doesn't make any sense to do that. So I told Chick McGinn I'm skeptical of this. I'll have to look into, but I have a good feeling that's not what I'll find. Kant was actually, I come to find, Kant wasn't from the school of he wasn't from the school, but he
inspired the philosophies.
Yeah. A lot of Enlightenment philosophers
or
did.
rather, the scholars of the Frankfurt School are inspired by his philosophy.
By Immanuel Kant.
Yes.
So I asked, so by your logic, Plato's The Cave is critical theory, because again that predates Christianity and definitely the Frankfurt School. And I would see The Cave as critical theory because it poses the question: do we have to accept what's right in front of us, or do we push beyond the viscera? Do we look beyond? Do we gaze into the looking glass, or do things have to be this way? And it turns out that once you step outside of your comfort zone, what you find is no, it doesn't have to be. Women do not have to be subservient to men. We come to find we don't need to persecute LGBT folks. We don't need to treat people of different color any differently. These things are arbitrary.
We don't need conversion therapy.
Well, and it doesn't work, so it's a waste of time. But I mean,
conversion therapy is not even therapy; it's torture.
So I would say that Plato's The Cave, even though it didn't come out of Frankfurt School, I would still say that it is essentially like a critical theory. And I would say much of the Enlightenment thinkers would fall into that category, which the Enlightenment thinkers inspired the Frankfurt School. So, yeah, and I quoted this, a critical theory is any approach to social philosophy that focuses on reflective assessment and critique of society and culture to reveal and challenge. And Friedrich Nietzsche absolutely did that, but Friedrich Nietzsche had nothing to do with the Frankfurt School. And
questioning social norms goes back.
Yeah, That's my point. It's old as fuck. It's very, very old.
Like, I'll go to the Milesian school. I'll share my screen again.
Okay.
The Milesian school was a school of pre-Socratic philosophy of the 6th century BCE, based in the Ionian town of Miletus. It is generally considered the first school of thought of ancient Greek and thus Western philosophy. It consisted of 3 philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, who were all primarily interested in cosmology and the origin of substance of the world. They believed the world to be made of a fundamental element, and arche, and their philosophies through differing in a number of ways, similar that they were all characterized by material monism and Zoism. Because they believed that the world, it was the first attempt to explain the world through natural means rather than through means of mythology and religion.
I mean, a lot of this stuff is very old.
Yeah. Like, for example,
well, it says it predates Socrates, the Socratic method. So that means it predates Socrates.
It's pre-Socratic philosophy.
So that's
because even the philosopher of Anaxagoras, he hypothesized that the sun was a flaming rock, which at the time was a rational position.
Well, and he wasn't far from the truth. I mean, it is flaming, no. But it's not a rock.
Yeah, and the philosopher of Aristarchus, he was the first one to propose heliocentrism. And he pretty much got the measurements very, very close. But it's not really what science says it is today. I mean, his numbers were off, but not by much. And yeah, the Greeks figured out the world was round. They used sticks. They used sticks and strings to measure out how the Earth has curvature. You know.
Well, I just look up at the sky and I see that it's dome shaped.
I mean, that was the argument that we live in a firmament and that the world is flat. You know?
Well, I don't think it. One of the things I would argue to the flat earthers is like, just look at the sky. I mean, it goes from the horizon starts there, it goes up and it comes back down there, and it doesn't matter where you're at on this world, it does the same thing. I think we live in a globe.
Well, and that was like also one of the arguments for geocentrism. You know, you look at the sky and you see the sun going from east to west. Same with the stars and everything. You look at the sky and it's like the sky moves around. You know, one of the arguments of geocentrism is that the Earth is a sphere, and that the Earth is in like a spherical celestial plane. You know, and the Earth is in the center of it all. You know, because that's our perspective from when we look up at the sky. That was the argument of geocentrism. Because when you look at like ancient geocentric maps, have the Earth at the center, and then they have the Earth, or they have the Sun positioned somewhere in the outer rings of the the solar system model.
So, Jake Micken actually brought up something that is a legitimate concern that of the Frankfurt School. It's not just implying. He says the Frankfurt School set out to destroy us and took over academia. If that is actually true, which I don't think that it is, that would be a deep concern. But I don't think that that is a concern. I don't think that that's actually what's happened.
No, because not every academic university is influenced by the Frankfurt School.
Well, and I've been in academia myself, and I can tell you they teach they teach leftist models, they teach conservative models, they teach centrist models. I mean, it's not limited to, you know. I don't know where they get this, where this comes from, like why they think that. I think it's pretty well balanced. I mean, if you take a logic and critical thinking class, they don't just teach like, here's Frankfurt. Well, actually, in the logic and critical thinking classes I took in college, they didn't bring up Frankfurt School at all. They brought up a lot of the old philosophers from like Greek and Roman times, but in logic and critical thinking, you don't really focus on the philosophers as much as you do on how to construct an actual logical argument.
Mm-hmm. And one of the arguments of what if Altist, he was talking about how over the centuries in the last 50 years, academia has becoming more and more liberal. Like he was putting out this model of this diagram of the conservative over on the left, and then over time that diagram gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it goes over to liberal or whatever. I think he was trying to paint the picture of academia becoming more liberal over time, to where it's silencing conservatives, which I don't really think is the case.
I don't think it is either. I think it's a conspiracy theory. When I was in high school, I went around asking teachers what they're in private, because they're not supposed to talk about it publicly. They're supposed to try to remain politically neutral. I went around asking teachers if they were Republican, conservative, or left and liberal, or because back then liberal just meant leftist. Like leftist, liberal, it was interchangeable. Now it has like a different, for some reason, meaning. But I realized I had a lot of conservative history teachers. My American government teacher was conservative. My history teacher was conservative. Not my biology teacher. Well, the biology teacher refused to tell me. But I'm just saying, like, I had a lot of conservative teachers, and conservatism, what that meant to them is seems to be very different than what the right is trying to represent themselves as now. It's really more like the right's changing more than I think the left.
Do you think the right is becoming more classical liberal due to the overtake of economic fascism?
I think there's a lot of propaganda going around, and propaganda, well, the whole point of propaganda is to persuade people on things that are not ultimately real.
And propaganda is happening both on the left and the right, where you can't distinguish what is truth. Like, you pretty much have to dig deep to find truth at this point. And this is why when the left and the right they perpetuate propaganda. They all say they're both like centrists are sympathetic to the fascists, and the right people say the conservatives are pandering to liberals, and it's like you can't. It's like when you're a centrist, you just can't win.
Well, I'm a leftist, but like I've tried to explain, a lot of my leftist views didn't come from Marx. It didn't come from the Frankfurt School. It came from Enlightenment philosophy, liberal philosophy, and believe it or not, the four horsemen of atheism, people like Michael Shermer, Dan Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins.
I think that's more than four.
Oh, it is more than four, but there were more people involved with like the atheist movement. It wasn't just the four horsemen.
Right.
And a lot of people would consider them, except for Christopher Hitchens, but if he didn't die, if he was still alive today, they'd probably do the same thing to him. But now they consider like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins to be, what are they, the neocons, I guess, or conservatives of some kind. And it's like because the trans community on trans Twitter has been critical of Richard Dawkins for some reason.
Well, because he's a biology professor, and to him,
I think the only thing that exists is sex. Richard Dawkins has done a lot to fight for trans rights, not just trans, but the LGBT in general. He used to do this thing where he was a little edgelord, and he'd answer like angry emails from Christian parents, and basically like he would berate them and make fun of them on a panel to make them feel bad about, you know, trying to disregard their LGBT kids or whatever, or being discriminatory. And so, but one of the things that Richard Dawkins advocated for that I thought was very, very beautiful sounding was an anti-Darwinian society. And that's antithetical to the fascist model. You can't have an anti-Darwinian society under the fascist model.
No, because fascism advocates for Darwinism.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the epitome of Darwinism.
well, I mean, they put to death like people who were like crippled and weak and stuff because they wanted, you know, the Übermensch, which was a bastardization and total misinterpretation of what Friedrich Nietzsche was trying to say.
Exactly.
All right, let's go on, continue on so we can eventually get to Julius Evola. Okay, so Plato's Cave was nothing like critical theory. I would argue that it is. I would say that much of philosophy is critical theory. Critical theory is the suggestion that we should discard all of our morals and values and pretty much do the opposite of everything our ancestors did. At some point, I mentioned what ancestors, because there's things that our ancestors did that we would find morally or ethically incorrect today for good reason, such as pederasty. I don't think that's a good idea. But one of the things, the big significant markers that happened between our ancestors and the Frankfurt School was metaethics, and realizing that morality, ethics, quite possibly could be pretty much subjective, and the only social cohesion we're experiencing is we are holding it together from our own imaginations. So, then I go on to Hegel was one of the attendees of the Frankfurt School as well, but honestly, most philosophers have some level of critical theory of some kind. Not all critical theory is Marxian nor neo-Marxian. Interesting. And the definition that I gave at the beginning of this of critical theory was the exact definition that I copied and pasted. That's why it is in quotation marks. Then you chimed in and said the Nazis hated the Frankfurt School because the Institute of Social Research was founded by Marxists, founded by a Marxist who was also Jewish.
By a Marxist who was also a Jew.
Felix Weil. Weil?
Weil.
Okay. They saw it as a threat. It was probably part of a conspiracy theory of Jews taking over the world. And, I mean, if you talk about Nazism and you talk about Marxism or Jewish in the same sentence, well, you don't need much for the Nazis to hate it at that point, because they wanted to...
It's like now the whole thing about, like, the Jewish conspiracy and the whole leftist Marxism thing, that originates from the fact that Felix Weil was both a Marxist and a Jew. So then it makes sense to why white nationalists make those two conspiracy theories and why they lump the two, and why they hate them. So now when you connect the dots, that makes sense now. Why they say that.
Chick Micken is talking about LGBT indoctrination going on in schools. If you go and you look at the libs of TikTok and actually watch the videos, they are not indoctrinating and they are not grooming.
They don't even talk about LGBT shit in public schools. Like, when I went to public school, they didn't talk about LGBT shit at all.
Well, now they're starting to, but it's more like they exist. Like, sometimes a child might have two mommies or two daddies. Or, like, one of the people that they put on there that as grooming and indoctrinating was somebody who said, I'm what's called trans. That means that when I was born, they assigned me as female, but now I identify as male. And so, yes, trans people exist. And the thing is that's mind-blowing is, like, the gay population only makes up 10% of the population, and trans people are even less. It's like 1%, 1 or 2%. And it's like, to think that this is going to just overtake and overthrow everything is insanity to me. I don't understand how giving equal rights to people of color, to the LGBT people, and letting them thrive as equal citizens or with egalitarianism, I don't see how that's going to make society crumble. It's not going to cause birth rates to drop, because ultimately homosexuality is not a learned behavior. It is involuntary. And being trans, well, I mean, like, that takes a special level of dedication. Like, it's not a whim. Like, I mean, the amount of stuff that you have to go through as a trans person is not something you would just go through because.
Yeah, you don't do this for attention. You don't do it when it's not something that you choose when you wake up one day, like, oh, good, this is a good morning, I'm going to be trans today. It's like, no, that doesn't happen.
And there's studies coming out now that are showing more and more that that, like, even when little kids are, you know, quote unquote confused, that they just that happens. You know, they might dress or act like the opposite sex for a while, but they ultimately come to the conclusion, even at a very young age, like, this is a very short-lived thing, that no, I don't identify as this. And that's the majority. That's the majority.
But the fucked up thing is that we're seeing some people like some people are being authoritarian about it, like, where they try to tell other people what their identity is, and it's like, well, like, oh, you must have these traits of this gender, therefore you're this gender, therefore you should transition. And then there's people who do this, and then they're like, I should have never done this, and then they detransition. And the thing about detransitioners in the trans community is very, 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 very small. There's not that many detransitioners as conservatives like to point out that there is.
Yeah, and Jake Micken, I literally went through libs of TikTok and watched those videos. I mean, no, they're not indoctrinating. They're not. You might find. I think there was one that I saw that was really sketchy, and it was from the UK, and I think that is horrible, and the person shouldn't be doing this. But they were holding a sex education seminar to be held with the children's parents that was live representation with real genitals and stuff, and I'm like, oh dear, like that's unacceptable. That's over in the UK. But not here. That's not acceptable. We're not going to do that here. And
the whole thing about like giving quote unquote children giving children hormones, that's not what the doctors are doing. They're giving them puberty blockers, and puberty blockers, they do not affect they just delay puberty is what they do. They don't do anything else. And if the person in their teen years wants and later changes their mind about like being trans or whatever, they can get off of the puberty blockers, and then they can go on to have their own their puberty as their sex that they were assigned to, is if they change their mind.
Well,
but if they don't change their mind, they can get off of the hormone blockers at some point, and then in late teen years they can start getting on hormones. That's how it works. You don't give children fucking hormones. Nobody is advocating for that. Nobody.
And the thing is like if we want to go into the whole white replacement conspiracy, if we're going to pin that on the LGBT movement, I think that's ridiculous, because for one, LGBT people have already been here. They've always been here. The only real difference is you're granting them equal rights, and that actually extends them into the ability to more easily have the option to reproduce, because reproducing is very, very expensive. And when the government doesn't recognize two people as partnered, the likelihood of them actually reproducing is slim, because to say the least, LGBT people can reproduce, just not conventionally. So, just saying.
And a trans woman can get her cis woman pregnant. That can happen.
Yes. And so that's not, and like I said, it seems to be a pretty constant. The gay community makes up only 10% of the population, so granting gay people equal rights to the majority as a minority citizen, well, guess what? That's part of the Constitution that we have. They don't want majority rule, they don't want minority rule, but they don't want the majority to overpower the minority. And the thing is just, well, I mean, like I said, the only thing that's different now is that gay people have rights. That's the only thing that's different. It's not crumbling society. It's not. There's no evidence of that. I look and look and look and look and look. I see nothing. And as I said, if the population was really, really like scarily low, which it's not, there's 7 billion with a B. 7 billion people in the world. I mean, you know, it's probably a good thing that we're holding back on reproduction a little bit, which is, I mean, if you go through history of human civilization, it's had its ups and downs in population, and I would say that, you know, maybe if the population was soaringly low, then I don't know that gay people would be against like donating sperm or donating eggs just to make sure the human population can continue to exist. But the obsession with ethnicity, race, that kind of thing, I think that's something that only people are interested in who are racialized themselves. Like they look at the world in that sort of light. Most rational people, I don't think, really care. So I went on to say Friedrich Nietzsche is kind of in the category, but he died. I already went over that, so I'm just going to go to the next one. So this is number 2. Here we go, 3. All right, so also what ancestors, you go back far enough, our ancestors did things we should disregard, such as pederasty. And Chick Micken says, I was never a fan of Nietzsche and his Übermensch. And you mentioned that Hegel died before Frankfurt. I'm trying to get to... Hold on. I'm trying to get to where we can get... So... This is when I find, so Chick Micken recommended Julius Evola. And I did not want to go to a bunch of leftists who would just be like, oh, Julius Evola is a Nazi or a fascist, you should ignore him. I wanted to actually know what Julius Evola's philosophies were through my own eyes, like through his own words, so I could come to my own conclusion and not be submitted to bias. So, and I have links to a lot of stuff in the description. So I have links to a lot of Julius Evola. I have links to the bad philosophy. But this is my take on Julius Evola, okay? I read and looked through as much information as I could find on Julius Evola. I tried to get it from non-biased sources because I know each side likes to be as biased as they can be. I even went through an hour-long interview with English subtitles with him, and I think the link I left is not with English subtitles. It's just in his language because I couldn't find the one with English subtitles anymore. He's interesting. I do agree changing... This is something I do agree with Julius Evola on. I do agree that changing the political compass to only be... and I should have said... Marx anti-capitalism versus fascism pro-capitalism is incorrect. That is not the political compass. That is not the political compass at all. I cannot relate to him very well. I also find it interesting... I missed a bunch. A lot of his philosophies are based off of the preconception that there is indeed a spirit... or gods, the metaphysical. As someone who rejects the idea of gods, or God, I cannot relate to him very well. I also find it interesting that he sounds like the fascist version of today's communists in that he does not condone Hitler or Mussolini's fascism, and pretty much says they didn't do it right. So he doesn't like Hitler or Mussolini's fascism because they, quote-unquote, didn't do it right. He said that the problem with Mussolini and Hitler's fascism is that Mussolini and Hitler's fascism didn't allow for as much religious freedom as he would like, as religious freedom, through his perspective, was a way to deal with sort of the existential crisis of life or one's own identity. I also think he is not popular in academia, not because he's very traditional and right-wing, but a lot of what he says seems profound, but it's not really. I don't like that he would hate... I do like... This is another thing I do agree with Julius Evola on, and I think the far left and far right agree on this, is we both don't like crony capitalism or cronyism, but honestly the only people that would like cronyism are rich multi-conglomerate CEOs and CFOs. The idea of a hierarchical system between male, female, as well as race to be very strange and not enlightening. This was illustrated in a quote from him: before concerning oneself with external actions, ... one should work on oneself against all that is formless, elusive, and bourgeoisie. I struggled with that quote until I realized that he considers males to be the true form and females to be formless. This is essentially just a massive amount of egotism and nowhere near as profound as it seems at surface level. Yeah, he was very, very obsessed with polytheistic religions, and he believed in telepathy. That's kind of weird. But he believed that actual the descendants of Indo-European people, or Indo-European people themselves, had actual powers of like the Greek gods and stuff. He believed this. He believed that your worth or value in this world was related to your spiritual value, and this is where he got the context or the idea that white people were supreme and that males were more supreme over females. And
then if like the ancient Indo-European peoples were around today, they would have looked at it and be like, no, you're doing it wrong, because we don't distinguish between this notion you call race, between what you call whites against like blacks, browns, and yellows and reds. We don't do that. We distinguish between ethnic groups, between borders, national borders. That's what we do. We don't get this whole notion of white supremacy, black supremacy. We don't understand that. Explain what that is. Why is this important? They would question that and that's the way that they would explain it. No.
And I do have a copy of that quote that I was referring to that did put ... so it wasn't the full quote, but here it is. Before concerning oneself with external actions which are often born of a temporary enthusiasm, devoid of deep roots. And what he's referring to in this devoid, this enthusiasm devoid of deep roots, is he's talking about the devoid of deep roots with...
he's talking about devoid of the ancient Indo-European religions.
Yes.
Of the historical classical societies.
And one should work on himself by means of an action against all that is formless, and as we learned is that he considered the female to be formless and elusive, or the bourgeoisie. Because you at first you mentioned you didn't understand anything that he was talking about. Well, that's a very weird proclamation to make, I think. To call the female form formless, well, obviously that's not true. Or elusive. Obviously, again, that's not true.
I think what he's trying to get at is trying to say that female is chaotic and male is order. I mean, that is basically what Taoism says about the male and the female. Like, the female is chaotic and the male is order. That's what that philosophy says, that Chinese philosophy.
Well, and
I think that is what Evola is trying to say.
Well, it makes sense because he studied Asian philosophy. That's one of his influences, as well as an SS officer was also one of his influences. So it's really hard to detach him from fascism and Nazism, being that he sit with them quite a lot. Chick Miggin says you were right. He viewed masculinity as order and femininity as chaotic. So he did the opposite of what the Asian philosophers were doing, where it's supposed to be like sort of the death of ego, and instead what he ended up doing is inflating ego. So I find that interesting. But I need to get a drink real quick. But you wanted to talk about
Survive the Jive.
Well, that's where this leads into Survive the Jive is because, like with Julius Evola and talking about like how Indo-Europeans actually were, it's like, were Indo-Europeans actually like racist in this sense? Like, did they care about ethnicity? Did they really do those things? I don't think that they did.
No. At least not like the white nationalist shit they didn't do. But they did discriminate against ethnicity, not race. Not like in terms of... But I did send you that video by Survive the Jive where he was responding to philosophy in regards to Julius Evola and Cheddarman.
Yeah, but I mean that's one of the things I was talking about was like, is Indo-Europeans, were they Aryan race? I mean, when did this come about? Because you had a lot to say on that. If you want, I can go over the reminders.
Yeah, like the notion of Aryan race originates from the 18th century and 19th century archaeologists or anthropologists and linguists. They had like this hubristic pride that they were descendants of this mythical race called the Aryans, which they were referring to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and they made this conclusion from studying Latin, Sanskrit, and Greek, and understood that these languages were very similar. They came to the conclusion that these languages came from a common source, and they said that this language was the language of this supposed Aryan race, which would later be called Proto-Indo-European. And the Indo-European languages were originally called Japhetic because Japhet is the descendant of Noah in the Bible. This was before that Sir William Jones discovered, quote, discovered Sanskrit in India when he compared Sanskrit with the Western, the European languages.
So, like, the dispute with Cheddarman is that they don't want to believe, they don't want to think that the indigenous European people started off as not white.
Because then they say, well, they have black skin, therefore they must be African. British people weren't African. And it's like, you can have black sub-Saharan African skin and not be African.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's pretty accepted in science that we started off hunter-gatherers in Africa, on the African plains. We migrated into Asia, where we made a split. And white skin, blue eyes, light hair, all that is an adaptive trait, not an evolutionary trait.
And those are more recent than what we originally thought.
Well,
because the thing about like white skin is that the original Proto-Indo-Europeans, they were most likely olive-skinned. They were not pasty white skin like Germanic people or Celtic people, because that would be an adaptation later on when the Indo-Europeans moved from the Eurasian Russian steppe over to Scandinavia and northern Western Europe, into Britain and other islands near Scandinavia, because that is closer to the Arctic Circle. And when you're closer to the Arctic Circle, you're going to get lighter skin, because the sun is different in the Arctic Circle than it would be in Africa or Egypt or Saudi Arabia.
Chick Miggin thinks that the theory that we are all descendants from Africa was discarded. That's not according to the Human Genome Project. I mean, the more and more samples we get of genetics,
there's people on the right that say, well, the out of Africa theory was debunked, and it's like, how? How did you come to that conclusion?
I haven't seen anything debunking it. What we've seen is that every male and every female has a genetic marker.
Even people in that chat of Survive the Jive's live stream that he did, there were people saying all this stupid shit about like out of Africa theory being debunked. I sent you some comments about that in his comment section in that video, and it's like, these people are just fucking stupid.
Well, in the Human Genome Project, what we found is that every male has a genetic marker that relates all the way back to the earliest fossil records of a male, like I don't know if they were Homo sapien. I think they were just hominid at the time, but there's a genetic marker in every male, and then there's a female fossil record that we have, and there's a genetic marker in every female that goes all the way back down to these two fossils in Africa. And as we've been collecting more and more data on genetics and everything, it's like I think every white person that we have has like at least 1 or 2% African in them because of this.
And Neanderthal DNA too.
Which tells us that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were interbreeding with each other.
And eventually the Neanderthal bred out.
Yeah.
But because
because they didn't have enough in their population to survive.
But I'm not. I don't know much about archaeology. I look into it from time to time. That's why I personally wouldn't feel comfortable talking about Survive the Jive. I don't know much about archaeology, but what I do know,
anthropology or something.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that. What I just said about the Human Genome Project and what it's found and what we've been finding with all these DNA tests scattered around. I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I was going somewhere with that.
I wanted to play some clips of Survive the Jive, but apparently I don't think it would do that. I don't think I can. I can't really hear the audio. It probably won't play the audio.
Oh, I was going to talk about Ötzi.
Yeah.
Ötzi didn't come... Cheddar Man predates Ötzi, and even Ötzi had olive-colored skin. And, I mean, he was found in...
He looked Mediterranean. He did not look Northern European.
And we know that because... Okay, this was not. We didn't have to look for genetic markers. He was mummified.
Yeah, because his body was found in the Alps mountains.
Mm-hmm. He was mummified, so we know what color his skin was, and it was olive colored.
And there's also the Tarim. There's also the Tarim mummies of northern China. The Indo-Europeans that would later become the Tocharians. The ancestors of the Tocharians, they're mummified there, and their skin is not like white; it's olive.
Well, Chig Migan said something to me, and this is, again, something I do actually have knowledge about, but not in the way that he's presenting it. He said Africans don't have Neanderthal genes. I suppose they wouldn't, because they didn't start interbreeding with Neanderthals until they moved up northern. But he says that they have genes that no other humans have. Google ghost gene. Actually, there's there's a really good explanation for this. The longer a species has been around, the more genetic diversity they have. And since Africa is the cradle of life, it would make sense and stand to reason that people who were born, raised, and have a long genetic lineage or family heritage that comes from Africa, guess what? They have higher genetic diversity.
Mm-hmm. It can be said that African Americans have more genetic diversity than European Americans.
This is why I like that guy that you told me about that taught. He's a scholar.
Metatron.
Yeah, because this is the most important thing to him. A thing that he loves to do is to be intellectually honest and consistent. It's about the absolute truth, and so like what like when he was going over the thing with like what did Jesus look like, and how are these things pronounced? So he went over the language in the Bible, but he pronounced very, very like he was very adamant about this. He was like, look, there are genetic markers that can tell us the ethnicity. Like, I mean, within the 0.01% of your genetics.
Because he said, in order to figure out what Jesus looked like, we have to look at what the average person in that population would have looked like.
Well, he also brought up some other things, but he admitted that telling the ethnicity based on bones is a lot harder than telling the sex. Sex is easy. There's sex markers and bones all over the body, from the skull to the ribs to the pelvis. But in determining ethnicity,
to the femurs, I think males have longer femurs than women.
But in determining ethnicity, that's a trick and a half. You pretty much You need DNA to do that, and it's in a 0.01%.
That's why Metatron showed computer imagery of how you could determine what Jesus looked like, or what he would have looked like.
So,
and he also brought up like the depictions of Jesus of like the Romans depicting Jesus as not bearded, but as an average Roman citizen wearing a tunic and short hair and Mediterranean skin, because the purpose of that is to convert the common person to Christianity. The whole purpose of making the person similar to the population is to convert the population, because it's to bring out the familiarity to the population.
Jigmig genetic diversity means that you have genes no one else has. That's the definition. I mean, it's genetic diversity, meaning different genetics. And that's actually healthy for any species. It's healthy for any species to have a higher genetic diversity, but your skin color, your eye color, your hair color is only in 0.01% of your genetic code. We don't have enough genetic diversity in the human species to even say that there's different breeds of people. We are literally all one breed. We just happen to be different colors.
We don't even have enough to be different species.
No, we don't. Now, you said at one point, like, if Neanderthals were still running around, then you could make that argument, but they're not.
Yeah.
So, you want I have to try and find this. What video is it that you wanted to play?
This one on Twitter, the one by Van der Merwe. Third speaker, Thomas Roswell, aka Survive the Drive, a far-right YouTuber, Roswell asked that his attendance be kept secret and not recorded. He came late and read the speech off his phone, but Generation Identity accidentally recorded it and sent me the video, so everyone messed up.
I have to look. I can play it, but I have to sit here and look through all this. You sent me a lot of stuff.
You can play it?
I can.
Because I'm trying to play it, but it won't play the audio. But you can share the other stuff by Survive the Drive, like all of the comments people made in the comment sections and in that live stream of his, the chat, because I know you saved those. Because people in that have spewed a bunch of fascist conspiracy theory nonsense.
But
hold on, just give me a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Now I'm gonna do screen share so you can see.
A merchant named Van Senden was authorized in a letter from the Privy Council to deport the blackamoors to Iberia. But the masters of the blacks, who kept them as servants, did not want to lose their black servants. This was before slavery. There was no transatlantic slave trade, of course. Servants and slaves are different things. Van Senden was opposed by the masters, and so a merchant named Van Senden was authorized in a letter from the Privy Council to deport the blackamoors to Iberia. But the masters of the blacks, who kept them as servants, did not want to lose their black servants. This was before slavery. There was no transatlantic slave trade, of course. Servants and slaves are different things. Van Senden was opposed by the masters, and so a merchant named Van Senden was authorized in a letter from the Privy Council to deport the blackamoors to Iberia.
But I mean that's what you were looking for, right?
Yeah. And then you look at all the tweets and everything, exposing him.
That was from someone else, some guy that was tweeting back and forth.
Oh yeah, I think I sent those.
Here. This is about Sanskrit.
The etymology of Aryan.
Oh, okay. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it comes from Sanskrit, the original word Arya, meaning noble. That's why it was called Aryan in the first place. But a lot of modern scholars kind of just don't really use it just for the fact that it's association with Nazism. But Hindus still use Aryan for their identification. A lot of Hindu nationalists use it. use Aryan to identify themselves, but they used Aryan in a different context than what ethno-nationalists in the West use it as.
Okay, that's backwards. Here we go.
Yeah.
And then this is the next one.
That's like all of the definitions of Aryan. You can read those.
Okay, Theosophy, Germanic mysticism, Nazism, a member of an alleged master race with no fixed definition, comprising people of Germanic descent in the narrowest sense, or all non-Jewish Caucasians in the broadest sense, quotations. Nazi or white supremacist ideology, informal, a person of Caucasian ethnicity, a white non-Jew, quotation. I can see why a lot of ethno-nationalist sort of white supremacist people gravitate towards Indo-European culture with all these definitions. Chiefly U.S. informal, euphemistic, a Caucasian racist, often one who is an Aryan in the first sense, quotations. 4, dated and Indo-European, a Proto-Indo-European. 5, an Indo-Iranian. And
Iranian.
And 6, a subdivision of the Caucasian racial and linguistic grouping when that grouping is defined as consisting of Aryans, Semites, and Hamites. And the thing is, though, is if you go back to tribalist days of human beings, my understanding is that these tribes, they would conquer each other. They kill a lot of the males, maybe turn them into slaves, but they'd fuck the women, turn the women into sex slaves. But I don't think that there was a lot of interest in what skin color they had. It was more about what tribe. Like, so this stuff predates all this religious crap. And
all of this ethno-nationalist crap.
And well, yeah, and so there's multiple sources I've seen where it shows that we've been biracially, so to speak, coupling for centuries now.
Yeah, the Romans intermingled with Germanic people, even though the Romans conquered Germanic peoples and considered Germanic peoples lesser.
So, like this tribalist segregation or separation of one ethnicity being better than the other and blah, blah, blah. It's all superficial as hell. And then you have the etymology of, I guess, what is it?
That's the Sanskrit word for the Arya. It comes from Proto-Indo-Iranian Aryas, which is pretty much the same definition. It's pretty much like, it's to mean like a person who is Aryan or person of like a ethno-linguistic term for a noble, for someone who's noble. That's what Aryan originally meant, and that is what the Sanskrit term means. You can read those like the first sense is one who speaks the language of the Vedas, which was Vedic Sanskrit.
There's a lot of words on here I cannot pronounce because I do not excel in Indo-European studies.
I know you don't speak Sanskrit. I mean, I look into Sanskrit, but I normally just look through the language through a Romanization of the alphabet because I cannot read Devanagari.
Chick Micken says it's never been about who's better in regards to race, so it's just about the continuation of fascism, is it? But then he says we have the right to continue existing and control our own destiny and our own states. Again, define ours. I mean, like, I live in a...
It totally is about supremacy. That's the whole reason why the notion of race was invented. It's because it's to promote superiority over others and therefore engage in xenophobia. That's why the notion of race based on skin color was invented in the 1600s. Before the 1600s, we didn't have such a distinction. We defined people before the 1600s by ethnic groups or by national borders, which is how the ancient people saw themselves and others. Because people didn't distinguish others by race in terms of skin color back in ancient times. People just didn't do that.
Well, and the thing is like, I mean, like now, in the now, I personally live in a multi-ethnic community, and I mean, nobody cares. I mean, nobody really cares. It's just like, I mean, even with biracial coupling, it's like, okay, your offspring still carries on your genetic lineage. People are just people. Really, this divide is very superficial, and it's based on aesthetic value alone. The people that live in the community with me are still a part of my community. They're still a part of my tribe, regardless of what color they are. That is irrelevant.
Regardless of what their ethnicity is.
Yes. This is further elaboration on your...
Yeah, because there's more senses to the word, the Sanskrit word. There's a ton of different meanings. But noble is just the most well-known sense of the word.
Well, this is an interesting definition. A person having the self-ascribed qualities of a speaker of the language.
Of the Aryan language, which is just Sanskrit.
A respectable, honorable, faithful man, one who is faithful to the religion of his country, a man highly esteemed,
i.e., meaning Brahmanism, or the Vedic religion, or Hinduism. That's what that sense means.
One who is faithful to a religion of his country. That's very tribalistic. A respectable, honorable, faithful man. A man highly esteemed. A respectable, honorable man. In later times, name of first three castes.
Castes.
Then you go into a language I don't know.
I think it's referring to the caste system of India.
From developments in Buddhist Pali usage, Buddhism.
Pali.
A man who has thought on the four chief truths of Buddhism and lives accordingly as a Buddhist priest.
Probably one that has achieved enlightenment.
Proper noun, a son of Manu.
Of Manu.
I don't know.
Manu in Hinduism was basically the first is the first one, is basically the ancestor of mankind, is what Manu was. Manu literally means like man, because man is a cognate with Manu. And in Proto-Indo-European, it would be Manus.
Oh, further down, this is a lot of language I don't understand. I can't read this.
That's just like the derived terms and the descendants. That doesn't really matter. And that is like where the definition, the Western definition of Aryan doesn't make sense, because since Aryan is an Indo-Iranian term, it refers to the lands of the Iranian people and the Indian people. You know, if you're like a Western European and you're calling yourself Aryan, it doesn't make sense, because you don't live in the land of the Aryans. Aryavarta is literally the land of the Indians. It referred to India, is what it referred to.
That's what you were talking about to me, is that the Aryan referred originally to the Indian people from India.
Well, the Indians in India, and the Iranians have a term that's also derived from Proto-Indo-Iranian. It's Arya something, but it's mainly an ancestor to Iran, because Iran and Aryan are cognates. They come from the same source. Because in Middle Persian, Iran is called Iran.
Okay, so that's it for that. That was all the screen captures that I had from that.
Mm-hmm.
But you also talked about how there was a mistranslation between invasion of India and migration of India.
Yeah.
What was that about?
It was about the migration of India versus the invasion of India. When they say that the invasion of India, they mean that the Proto-Indo-Europeans were this warlike people, patriarchal people. That's only a half-truth. The other part of that is that, well, they were traders. They didn't just pillage and were warlike. They also traded, and they exchanged ideas and cultural aspects of their culture with other cultures that were already there before the arrival of the Indo-Europeans. They exchanged ideas. Like Indra is a Vedic god in the Vedas. He's the Vedic thunder god, and it's hypothesized that Indra does not originate from the Proto-Indo-European religion. It originates from one of the cultures that the Proto-Indo-Iranian people have come in contact with.
So when was that dated? This migration? When was that?
The Indo-Iranian the migration of India into India, that happened around in between 800 BCE to 1500 BCE, because the Vedas can be dated all the way back to 1500 BCE. The Vedas are the oldest religious text on Earth. It's way older than the Bible, way older.
And it's older than even some of the Indo-European like gods and goddesses of the stories. Like I mean, we have the Iliad.
The Iliad wasn't written until like the 8th century BCE.
Oh my god.
Because the Iliad was written in the 8th century BCE. Then in the 7th century BCE, you have Works and Days and the Theogony written by Hesiod, and the Iliad and Odyssey were pretty much written in the same time period. Well, the Iliad came first and then the Odyssey. But the thing about the Vedas is that they weren't written until later on, like in the later half of the 1st century BCE. They weren't written down. Same with the Mahabharata. That wasn't written down until later. Before that, it was all oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation, from around like 1500 BCE all the way down to basically the time of Jesus and a little bit later on. That's a very, very, very long time to pass down an oral tradition.
Yeah, I would say so. I think we've been having our live stream go on for quite a while. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, what about the comments the comments and the statements by Survive the Jive in his live stream and comments sections? Weren't you gonna show those?
Well, I was going to leave it up to you to talk about Survive the Jive, because I really don't know anything about him.
Well, I mean, you have the screenshots and all of that stuff. I don't.
I do have the screenshots somewhere.
Because I remember, because I think you showed me before we started the live stream. You know, that one where that one guy was talking about like the Great Replacement, like, oh, they're going to come after our Scandinavian heritage, they're going to come after our Celtic heritage, they're going to come after our X and X heritage or whatever. You know, the fucking paranoia of the Great Replacement, which is not happening.
I think the thread from Twitter is what you're talking about. It's this. It was somewhere in this Dr. Wade guy going on about Survive the Jibe and being a crypto-fascist, and I mean this goes on and on. He makes a lot of claims.
Yeah. Like that one with the skull or something.
Well, what you're talking about is this one. Somebody in his live feed comments, they plan to first erase our Anglo-Saxon heritage, then they will attack our Roman and Celtic heritage.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Like, Survive the Jive was all about, like, they're trying to remove Anglo-Saxon from academia. And it's like, where? Why would they do that? Why? What would be the point of that?
The motivation.
Yeah.
No, I went into a deep thought on that one. I know what you're talking about. It's the control of information of where this comes from. It's like if I were to look up where this Great Replacement comes from, what am I going to find? Because if you go and you look at it, it calls it a conspiracy theory. So where is someone like this in this comment? Where is he getting this information where it's not being referred to as a conspiracy theory? And one of the problems that we run into is that when it is called a conspiracy theory, quite conveniently, the people who perpetuate this stuff will say, oh, well, the media is being controlled by the Marxists, or the information is being controlled by the left, or it's being controlled by the Jews as some conspiracy theory. And one of the biggest questions I would ask is, to what point and purpose? What is the motivation behind doing such a thing? What do they have to gain from that?
Oh, and I also wanted to expand on the migration and invasion thing. It's the thing about that is that since we have more data now than we did 200 years ago, it's no longer called an invasion of India. It's called the migration of India, because it wouldn't be all like warmongering and all of that shit. It would be more trading and trading and cultural exchange, and the India has its own theories that just cannot be proven. It's the out of India theory, where they say that, oh, the Indo-European peoples, we all come from India. Sanskrit is the mother language to all of the Indo-European languages, and it's like that is not the case, because the linguistics, etymology, philology, and anthropology and archaeology do not support that claim, because domestic horses are not found in India before 1500 BCE. So therefore, it's more likely that people migrated into India rather than migrated out of India.
Well, see, here we have somebody, in the live chat. I can actually ask this to Chick Micken, but where do you get that information that white Americans ages 16 and under are already a minority, and that if you say it's a good thing, then that's okay. But if you say hold on, I get what you're saying. Okay, so if you say that's a bad thing, then they say it's a conspiracy theory. Who are you getting that from? And I have a feeling if I look that up, I'm going to find a lot of people like this guy.
You're going to find a lot of right-wing propaganda, like far-right propaganda.
That's what my concern is that I don't think that's actually happening.
It's not. If it was happening, don't you think that the mainstream news would talk about it?
Well, he says mainstream media. They brag about it and say it's false in the same news sources, New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, etc. All types of mainstream media I do not follow. I read my news.
I get my news from Ground News and Newsbreak.
Well, I read my news from various sources.
Yes.
So I mean I don't. I think you'd be really, really hard pressed to prove that this is an actual reality that's happening.
I mean, on those tweets by that guy, you should click on one of the tweets, because I think they like the picture of that jaw. You should click on, and then read what he was saying about that. Click on that.
Start at the beginning. Jesus Christ. He goes by Survive the Jibe, STJ, online, and describes this video as putting people on trial. He stepped in scientific racism and cites academic studies about Anglo-Saxon DNA to dismiss academic arguments that he doesn't agree with. And then he shows these pictures, and I guess... Remember, the AS invasion has been proven by a DNA, and that AS
AS is Anglo-Saxon. That's what he means.
I was wondering. Literary and material culture is distinct in Britain, and therefore the term is 100% legit and useful. This push is anti-intellectual and anti-English. And then goes to say, here is another WHG over 5K years older than...
That's Western hunter-gatherer.
5,000 years older than Cheddarman, narrow nasal cavity and square eye sockets, aka a white man's skull. Whatever complexion they had European features, so why give them African noses, etc.?
Wouldn't you call that an assumption or some kind of fallacy?
Why?
Or do you think that he's just making false claims or something?
Well, I don't know how. I mean, this is archaeological type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know stuff about that. That's why I didn't. I don't know anything about this guy. All I can do is read these tweets from this Dr. Eric Wade. He says it's important to feel pride in one's ancestors. Now, this guy is just complaining, and he needs to spit out some evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Dr. Eric Wade needs to provide evidence of what he's claiming about Survive the Jive at this point.
Well, there's a Reddit thread about Survive the Jive, and a lot of people say that yes, he is.
But this is why I didn't want to cover Survive the Jive, is because I don't know anything about him, and I don't know anything about what he does. I mean, I could read through this entire thing, and all I'd be doing is reading someone else's thoughts on him.
Mm-hmm. As I said, not a lot of people have called him out on his agenda, on his far-right agenda.
Well, and, I mean, if he does, it's probably a matter of time before that's leaked, just like what happened with... Well, I mean, I don't think it was a big surprise with Richard Spencer when he had that audio leaked about it, how he felt about Jewish people. But...
Or Steve Bannon or something.
I think Steve Bannon is pretty open about how he feels. No, the most recent one was the leaked audio from Paul Joseph Watson. That was a big thing. Mm-hmm. But like I said,
what was the whole deal with Paul Joseph Watson?
He said a whole bunch of... He slurred out Middle Eastern people. He slurred out black people. He slurred out the LGBT community. I don't know. It's probably somewhere here on Twitter if you look for it hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know anything about...
Basically, what I wanted to touch upon is that Survive the Jive is just talking about Indo-European topics with a certain agenda in mind.
Well, his followers certainly do.
Yeah, but and it's also noted that that Survive the Jive is friends with the Golden One, who is a known white supremacist.
Yeah.
And Survive the Jive is more quiet about it. He's just a crypto-fascist. A lot of people have talked about it in that thread, in that Reddit thread that I sent in r/heathenry, because there's a lot of people who do condemn him for that. Because calling out fascists in the polytheist community is something that, we have to do. Because we don't want to associate with them. Because they're just using polytheism as a way to spread their racism and right-wing politics.
Well, I mean, they are going to gravitate towards this because it is the original theology of white people.
Mm-hmm.
But
in terms of like modern ideologies of the far right and alt right, the ancients wouldn't understand it.
Well, they wouldn't understand it for many different reasons. One being that they were tribalist and they hadn't yet established any sort of sense of complicated infrastructural governmental system.
Well, I mean, there are groups of polytheists that are like tribalistic like that, who exclude people and say like, oh, the DNA is important to the god, whatever. And these people are called folkists, and folkists are basically fascists who take polytheism and use it for racist ideology purposes. And folkists are basically people that just need to be called out by the polytheist community, by everybody, because these people are a problem. People like the Golden One and Survive the Jive and the Wisdom of Odin, they're all folkists, and especially Wisdom of Odin, he's been called out by the polytheist community too. There are videos about him that call him out on his bullshit. So, yeah,
It's just that I wanted to touch upon like the crypto-fascism and the folkism of that side of like the far right, because it is a problem in the polytheist community.
Well, I think if they wanted to do something about it, they should take the main important thing is to be intellectually accurate as possible, right? Like if you are reporting on what is it that he's reporting? He's reporting on like archaeological like Indo-European culture and stuff like that. And when doing that, you want to be as factual as possible. And if you're slanting in one position or another, you're not doing a very good job. You want to be as intellectually accurate as possible. So if he's doing something that isn't that, I think people need to get busy explaining why factually, based on empirical data and evidence, that he is spewing things that are not factual empirical evidence, and I think that's what they should do.
Tweet, Survive the Jive was saying that Cheddar Man was white skin, and it's like, no, that's not accurate.
Well, apparently we found a lot of skeletons that were in that same kind of category.
Mm-hmm. But like that one guy was saying, it's like, where's the evidence for our heritage being erased? Like, where is the evidence of that?
Like, I think that these like the people who cover that kind of thing, like Indo-European cultures, they need to step in and they need to say, hold on a minute, this thing that this guy said is incorrect, and this is the actual correct thing. And that's what I mean. Like, I didn't feel comfortable going over because I don't know anything about what he does or his channel or who he is. I've never watched anything he's done. And I'm not into Indo-European cultures, nor do I do anything on excavations or my knowledge on it is limited.
Well, I just wanted to point out that this person is flawed, and that he should be called out, because not a lot of people are.
Well, that would be for the people who do this kind of content.
Mm-hmm.
They need to get busy doing it, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And I know you tried to watch one of his videos, but you couldn't hear it because of his mic. You said his mic was shit.
His mic is shit. But, okay. I have tons and tons and tons of links. Well, maybe not tons and tons, but I've got links to various things that we've talked about in the description. I'm going to wrap this up. What is white supremacy? Well, it's racism through the eyes of a white person. Usually what it's referring to is the idea that white people excel or are over other ethnic groups, but not limited to. There are definitely other forms out there, but it's schismatic, it's otherizing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This notion that this land solely and specifically belongs to white people, it's excluding the notion that culture, societal traits it's supporting the existence of white people. I don't think anyone's not supporting the existence of white people unless it's somebody who's racist that isn't white. That those exist.
I mean, if anyone's coming forward saying that they support the abolishment of white people, that is genocide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling this to Chick Micken. That would be genocide. And that would be racist.
Well, I mean, with Survive the Drive, they have, like, people in that Reddit thread, they have accused him of being a crypto-fascist because he has been on Red Eyes TV, which was a neo-Nazi podcast. And his association with Generation Identity, which is a European version of, like, a white supremacist group.
And that I know of as well. That is, it has another name, Identity Europa.
Well, yeah. Well, it's called the Identitarian movement.
Yeah, Identity Europa. I learned about that a long time ago. I just don't know much about Survive the Jibe. But yeah, the videos I tried to watch, his mic was so terrible. I couldn't even make out. I could hear his refrigerator better than I could hear his own voice.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you all for joining. Thank you. You guys you guys all have a good night. All right. Now if I can figure out how I did all this before, like I set this up.